protests held on the anniversary of Chile's military coup. In Austria, a mass protest against COVID-19 health restrictions. And Olaf has been downgraded to a tropical storm while advancing through Mexican territory. Hello and welcome to teleSUR. I'm Jose Daniel Lopez in Quito, Ecuador, and this is from the south. This Saturday, Chile commemorates 48 years since the military coup that overthrew the socialist government of Salvador Allende. It is an emblematic date that ended with the assassination of President Allende, who refused to resign. This was followed by a 17-year military dictatorship led by Augusto Pinochet and defined by political persecution and forced disappearance of the regime's opponents. The socialist government of Salvador Allende, which lasted only 3 years, focused on economic reactivation, the nationalization of the mining industry, the redistribution of national wealth, and the recovery of public services. As every year, social movements and organizations of victims of the dictatorship lead actions of commemorations. The Chilean National Police dispersed demonstrators during the annual protests. Also, a small group set fire to a car and a gasoline station, while peaceful protesters marched to police put out the fire. During recent years, Chilean security forces have been part of repeated controversies over allegations of police brutality.
It's a very special moment because even if no Chile violates human rights, Chile now rises, and I can say enough of injustice.
Argentinian President Alberto Fernandez remembered Allende's last words via Twitter. Social processes are not stopped either with crime or force. History is ours and is made by the people. In Bolivia, Evo Morales tweeted, "We reaffirm our commitment to fight with the beloved figure of Allende and the condemnation the military coup ordered by the U.S. Also, Venezuelan President Nicolás Maduro said Allende is swathed in the conscience of the peoples of the great country. Today, the great avenues are opening." Commemorative acts began in the U.S. to pay tribute to the victims of the attacks to the Twin Towers, while survivors and relatives of the victims continue to demand justice. Memorial services for the almost 3,000 people who died as a result of the events began early Saturday morning at each of the 3 sites involved. President Joe Biden will lead the ceremonies at the 3 sites where the World Trade Center building was located, the Pentagon, and the site in Pennsylvania where the 3rd plane crashed, which was believed to have been recovered by the passengers. The so-called attacks on the World Trade Center 20 years ago were the excuse of the United States to launch wars against Afghanistan, Iraq, Libya, and other countries. In Peru, the founder of the guerrilla group Shining Path, Abimael Guzman, died on Saturday at the age of 86. Guzman was the maximum security prison of the Callao Naval Base, where he was serving a life sentence since 1992, accused of terrorism crimes. Legal authorities announced that he died early on Saturday due to health complications. Guzman abandoned academic life and went underground since the end of the 60s to join the armed struggle. Russia's foreign ministry has warned of possible external interference in the talks between the Venezuelan government and opposition sectors, and stressed that only Venezuelans can determine their future without foreign interference. In a statement, the ministry notes that as a supporter of the negotiation process between the government of Venezuela and opposition sectors hosted by Mexico, Russia calls on all members of the international community to contribute to creating the most constructive atmosphere for the talks. The ministry points to actions by external actors that risk undermining the fragile trust that has developed between both parties. Argentina prepares for Sunday's legislative primaries elections. More than 14,000 vehicles will be deployed in the next few hours to distribute more than 100,000 ballot boxes throughout the country. On Sunday, it will be expected the participation of more than 34 million Argentines who will have to vote to define which candidates will dispute the general legislative elections on November 14th, in which 127 deputies and 24 senators will be elected. Mexican President Andrés Manuel López Obrador described the latest agreement reached with the United States on migration matters as a success. The agreement reached on Thursday as part of the so-called high-level economic dialogue, which took place for the first time in 4 years, includes investment in social programs in Central America to tackle migration to the U.S. The United States agreed to give technical support, including collaborating with Mexico on several programs to provide work and support to agriculture. However, the two governments did not discuss the U.S. Remain in Mexico policy, according to Mexican Foreign Secretary Marcelo Ebrard, who noted that despite these, several infrastructure projects on the Mexico-U.S. border were raised. Still in Mexico, at least 2 people were killed and 10 others are missing after a landslide buried 3 homes on a hillside in the state of Mexico on Friday afternoon. Enormous rocks and earth became displaced from the Chiquihuite Hill, probably a result of recent heavy rainfall, according to officials. Heavy equipment and trucks were on the scene shortly after to remove debris and assist emergency personnel in the search for survivors. The missing include 6 adults and 4 children. 1 person was rescued and is being treated for injuries. Olaf has been downgraded to a tropical storm while advancing through Mexican territory along the Baja California Peninsula. According to authorities, the National Water Commission, the storm is over the coastline in the south of Baja California. Olaf is advancing towards the northeast of the country with a speed of 17 kilometers per hour, causing storm surges and heavy rains. The balance of damages include minor damage to trees, poles, and fences, as well as the temporary interruption of the electric service. The phenomenon is expected to move away from the Mexican coast starting this Saturday. In Brazil, thousands have participated in the second National March of Indigenous Women in the Brazilian capital on Friday to demand justice and respect for their rights. Our correspondent Brian Mir brings us more details in the following report.
8,000 members of over 150 different indigenous ethnicities camped out in Brazil this week to participate in the second annual Brazilian Indigenous Women's March and to protest against the genocide against indigenous peoples underway by illegal miners and ranchers encouraged by the federal government, which has led to charges filed against President Bolsonaro in the International Criminal Court in The Hague.
I wish Bolsonaro will leave us alone. I wish he will go to hell and leave us alone. We are not doing anything bad to him. I'm sorry about the swear words, but that is what he deserves. He's already rich. Why does he want our resources?
Of special concern this year is a case being ruled on by the Supreme Court, which, if approved, would require indigenous people to prove juridically that they or their ancestors lived on their reservations before 1988. This would make it easier for big business interests connected to the international commodities supply chain to kick them off of their land and burn down the forests.
We women are meeting here in Brasilia because our fight goes beyond the government itself. It is a fight for our rights and our life. That is why we are here, to reforest our minds, to heal the earth, and to fight for life of all humanity.
On September 10th, the women left the camp and marched into downtown Brasilia, demanding justice. Brian Mir, teleSUR, Brasilia.
We thank Brian Mir for that report, and we have more stories coming up after one last break. Welcome back. In Cuba, a shipment of humanitarian aid donated by several Caribbean countries has arrived to assist in the fight against COVID-19 through the humanitarian air bridge of the Alba Bank and the Venezuelan airline Conviasa. The states of St. Vincent and the Grenadines, St. Kitts and Nevis, St. Lucia and Barbados have sent a load of vitamins, gloves, masks and safety goggles. The Minister of Justice of Cuba, Oscar Silvera Martinez, thanked the donation, describing it as an act of health, friendship and love in a complicated moment that is being experienced due to the U.S. blockade against the Cuban people.
We want to deeply thank our brothers in the Caribbean, the government and the people of St. Vincent and the Grenadines, St. Kitts and Nevis, St. Lucia, Barbados, the Alba Bank, the Venezuelan government, for this act of help, friendship, and love towards the Cuban people at this complicated time, when, at a time of extraordinary sensitivity of our people in the fight against the pandemic, we're also suffering the onslaught of the tightening of the economic and financial blockade of the United States against our people.
548 days after having introduced restrictions to curb the spread of COVID-19, Denmark became one of the first nations in the European Union to remove them at the national level. The return to normality has been gradual, but a digital pass with proof of having been vaccinated is no longer required to enter nightclubs, which was the last remaining restriction in force. In late August, the Danish health minister said the epidemic was under control, but warned that the government will act if the situation deteriorated. Nightclubs reopened on September 1st, and limits on public gatherings were lifted.
I think it's great that Denmark is lifting their restrictions today. Makes it much easier to travel with the metro and so on and so forth, and it's just great to be back to normal.
I think I do feel safe because I think most of the people in Denmark, I think they are vaccinated, and also I think it's more about like how you handle the hygiene, and if you're trying to be careful about the hygiene, washing your hands, and try to keep a distance. So I think there is no need for that many restrictions anyway. So yeah, I think it's good that we don't have restrictions anymore.
In Vienna, about 2,000 people gathered against COVID-19 health restrictions and to demand the resignation of Conservative Chancellor Sebastian Kurz. Austria was among the first European countries to introduce a health pass system. Earlier this week, Austrian authorities announced that starting from September 15th, the government will tighten a range of COVID-19 measures. 1 week after reaching the intensive care load level of 15%, nightlife and activities without prescribed seating with more than 500 participants can only be visited by those who have been vaccinated or have recovered from the infection.
I completely excluded from everyday life. I don't get tested, and I can't go for a coffee. I can't do a sport. I can't do anything. I can only work, eat and shop. That's all.
Anyone who wants to be vaccinated should do so, but it should stay voluntary and children should be left alone. Children should not be vaccinated. It's unthinkable because, in my opinion, it's a poison.
The World Health Organization's chief for Europe, Hans Kluck, has expressed pessimism about the ability of high vaccination rates alone to stop COVID-19 pandemic, noting that new variants have reduced the prospect of herd immunity.
True that a while ago the European Technical Advisory Group was recommending about 80% of the eligible population, but this was at a time that there was no such emergence of more transmissible and virulent variants of concern. But I would say at the same time, if we consider that SARS-CoV-2 will continue to mutate and remain with us the way influenza is, then we should anticipate how to gradually adapt our vaccination strategy to endemic transmission and gather really precious knowledge about the impact of additional jabs. Thank you.
South Africa has launched the main phase of a global COVID-19 vaccine study on children and teenagers, led by the Chinese pharmaceutical company Sinovac Biotech. The study is testing the efficiency of Sinovac's two-dose coronavac vaccine on 14,000 children in Chile, Kenya, Malaysia, the Philippines, and South Africa. Coronavac is approved for use among adults in over 50 countries. China recently cleared it for use in children, where it has already been administered to millions from the ages of 3 to 17. South Africa, where vaccination has not been extended to under 18s, kicked off the study with 2 teenagers vaccinated at the Pretoria Health Science University.
We see a lot milder and less severe disease in children, but they still remain susceptible to infection. And because they remain susceptible to infection, we need to protect them because they are, in other words, getting the infection and they are able then to transmit it to the rest of the population, to other children and to adults.
Africa crossed the brink of 8 million cases of COVID-19 after a third wave of the pandemic hit the continent. According to reports from the Center for Disease Control and Prevention, more than 200,000 people have died from COVID-19 and about 7 million have recovered. Africa has only full vaccinated 3.18% of the population of about 1.3 billion people. Health authorities rule out achieving the target of vaccinating 10% of the population by the end of September. Africa is the continent with the lowest immunization rate, a situation that highlights the unequal distribution of vaccines and supplies between developed and developing countries. Real estate developers in Ghana are feeling the pinch of a recent hike in the cost of building materials, which has made building houses more expensive in the African country. According to government data, the real estate industry contributes significantly to Ghana's economic growth at the end of last year when coronavirus restrictions were eased. Real estate developers have said that they have to push up the prices due to the rising costs of building materials. Rating agency Fitch said Ghana's construction industry has grown by 14% this year after contracting by 5% last year. The agency links the growth to political stability and attractive labor market.
A lot of projects are being initiated today. We are not seeing, the project, especially when it comes to housing. If you find out how many contracts were signed in the past administration in terms of contract to execute certain housing projects, the numbers are so huge. If you put them together, we might be hitting about 2 million. But have you seen, even 100 of it? Yeah. So sometimes I'm not too sure where they are picking the data from.
Several thousand demonstrators have marched in Berlin to protest rising rents in the German capital. Protesters staged a large rally 2 weeks before the referendum to expropriate the city's large real estate companies. On September 26, Berliners will be called to vote in general elections and a revolutionary referendum that aims to expropriate residential apartments owned by large real estate companies. A nationalization in favor of social housing to calm the expensive rents and to address the housing shortages that affects the less well-off classes.
I find it a problematic development that people with a normal income cannot find affordable housing here. Housing, like other things, education, health, is in fact a fundamental right.
This is important to me because I can't pay more as a tenant. There are always rent increases, but my income doesn't increase.
More news in a minute. Stay with us. Welcome back. Pakistan International Airlines will resume flights from Islamabad to Kabul next week, becoming the first foreign commercial service since the Taliban seized power last month. Kabul airport was severely damaged during a chaotic evacuation of over 120,000 people that ended with the withdrawal of U.S. forces on August 30th. The Taliban have been scrambling to get it operated again with Qatari technical assistance, as well as Afghan airline resumed domestic flights last week. United Nations Secretary General Antonio Guterres noted his support for engagement with the Taliban in Afghanistan, saying it creates the conditions for the possibility of effective humanitarian aid to reach all Afghans.
The UN has been in Afghanistan since 1947. The UN has a key role to play in humanitarian aid to a people that is now in a desperate situation. And so we decided that it was our duty to engage the Taliban to create the conditions for the possibility of effective humanitarian aid, impartial, to reach all areas, and to take into account our concerns in relation to women and girls, for instance.
We continue in Afghanistan, where our collaborator Bak Jones brings us new information about the situation in the country.
After the Taliban announced their transitional government, they canceled the governmental decisions they had made to invite representatives from different countries to attend. The reason is still unknown, but some reports show that the Afghan internal security is still on the brink of an abyss, which prompted the leadership of the movement to announce the suspension of the inauguration ceremony of the new transitional government, amidst internal anti-Taliban actions carried out by groups that were joining the popular resistance called by Ahmed Massoud. The Taliban, who have seized large stockpiles of weapons found in impoverished areas of Panjshir, consider it as an important victory that allowed them to reduce the strength of the Panjshir resistance. They are facing other resistant groups in different regions of Afghanistan. The Pakistani government, for its part, asked the international community to recognize the reality of the new situation in Afghanistan, to lift the embargo on Afghanistan frozen assets in foreign countries, and to work for economic stability on the country. For his part, National Security Advisor Dr. Muhammad Yusuf said that Pakistan cannot bear instability in Afghanistan and that disengagement with the new Taliban is not an option. Yusuf denied that Central Intelligence Agency Chief General Hamid Chaudhry's visit to Afghanistan, where he met with senior Taliban officials, was related to Pakistan's roles in the information of the new Taliban government.
Israeli police said late Friday that they have captured 2 of the 6 Palestinian prisoners who escaped from an Israeli jail early this week. After an intensive 5-day manhunt, Israeli police say that the 2 were caught in the town of Nazareth. The Israeli army made more arrests on Friday of the relatives of the escaped prisoners, according to the Palestinian Prisoners Club. Meanwhile, Palestinians continue to protest to call for the release of political prisoners in Israeli jails and in support of the jailbreakers. More than 2,000 Palestinian prisoners announced that they will start a collective hunger strike in rejection of the brutal repression of the Israeli occupation and abuses against detainees. The Wade Prisoners Association reported that the protest will begin in early hours of Saturday. Meanwhile, the Israeli Prison Service transferred all Palestinian prisoners from the Hezbollah high security prison to other facilities following the prisoner escape.
It is certain that after the prisoners were liberated from the Israeli authorities and destroyed the Israeli security, Israel has a strategy of punishment towards the Palestinian people, whether they are prisoners or civilians. Prisoners will receive punishment. They will be deprived of rest or cafeteria, as well as the torture they will receive. Their conditions are bad. They are deprived of visits. I expect that Israel will take measure of punishment of prisoners and civilians.
Palestinians rally in most of West Bank cities and villages and the Gaza Strip in solidarity with Palestinian prisoners held by Israel and against their brutal mistreatment by the occupying forces. Since Monday's escape from Hezbollah prison, the Israeli Prison Service has launched a campaign of repression with measures against other Palestinian prisoners in violation of international conventions and agreements. The protests were, as usual, met with Israeli repression. In other news, Jamaican singer Karen Smith has died of cancer at the age of 60. Smith was one of the country's most recognized and respected cabaret performers. She won 9 Jamaican Music Industry Awards, and she shared the stage with artists such as Natalie Cole, Seal, Air Supply, Anita Baker, Ray Charles, and Harry Belafonte. She was also president of the Federation of Musicians. She entered the Bay West Hospital in Montego Bay last Tuesday due to complications of her cancer. Here is a music video of one of her most famous songs, Moonlight Lover, performed by Karen Smith in 2016. Rest in peace, Karen Smith. We come to the end of this news brief, but remember you can find this and many other stories as always in our website at telesurenglish.net. And follow us on social media, Facebook, Twitter, and Instagram. For Telesur English, I'm Jose Daniel Lopez. Thank you for watching.